Hey everyone. So, yeah, let me just check my mic is working. Cool. Can everyone hear me? Yes. Okay. Nice. So yes, this is me. I'm a software engineer and team lead at WeTransfer based in Amsterdam. And what that means for me, because it means something different at pretty much just every company I've ever worked in, it means that I write mostly JavaScript, mostly React with a bit of HTML, CSS, and I'm also a team lead. So I am responsible for the delivery of a team of 8, and I also manage the 6 designers and developers in that team, which is a lot of work, but I love it. And honestly, I feel incredibly grateful that I fell into front-end development. I think, when I was first getting into the industry, I was like, okay, maybe I'll be a designer. I tried design for a little while. Turns out I was really shit at it. This is me. I mean, like, what the hell am I wearing? Like, did I really think this was cool? I was not cool. No, this was terrible. So fortunately, though, I have worked with and been inspired by a whole bunch of amazing designers and companies. So here are some screenshots from a whole load of different open source style guides and design systems that you can find online. And what do I mean by a design system? Quick primer. So for me, it's an ecosystem of tools that unite teams around a common visual and interactive language. And that can be an umbrella for a whole bunch of different things. So I've got a list here. A pattern library, a style guide, a component library, design principles, brand guidelines, voice and tone guides, inclusion philosophies, tool graphic downloads, and there's still more in that list. The long story short is that if design systems are done well, then they mean shipping at higher quality and faster. And who doesn't want that? So, this is a screenshot of a conversation I had with a friend of mine recently. Let me read it out for you. So the problem I'm solving at the moment is that style guide changes are a bottleneck, and POs and teams are just ditching the style guide and implementing things themselves, or they're taking the style guide and they're overriding parts of it. It's a fucking mess. Who has heard of this story before? Because I have heard of this story so many times. And why is it so common that style guides fail? Well, to be honest, it's not that surprising, because by definition, people from multiple disciplines and teams need to collaborate and be invested in something that's not immediately tangible to your customers and therefore to your business. And so it can be extremely difficult to achieve. So I think the number one reason that companies fail at creating successful design systems is because they're just not ready for them. And also, does anyone know why Google recommended me Waterloo here? Like, I had ABBA stuck in my head while I was preparing this talk. So, okay, how to know if your company is ready. I'm going to cover a lot of things in this talk that will help you figure this out and give you some ideas on how to be as successful in this project as you can possibly be. But in my opinion, the thing that you need more than anything else is a designer, a developer, front-end developer, and a business person, such as a product owner. And the reason for that is these people need to have time and passion to make this design system work, and these roles are essential. So if you don't have a designer on board, well, all the other designers are probably going to ignore what you've been building. And if you don't have a developer on board, well, all the developers are probably going to ignore it as well. And if you don't have the business understanding why the design system is important, well, you'll never have the time to implement it. What this actually looks like in your company, of course, can vary. So in some companies, these roles might be covered by 1 or 2 or 50 people. But yeah, so if a design system sounds great, but your gut is telling you that not enough people in your company care about it, well, then don't do it. Instead, start the education process and get more people excited about it first, and then they'll be able to commit to it properly. Okay, so let's get into it. The design system I'm going to be talking about is called Stylabilla, and I built this with my team at my previous company. So far, it's a combination of a sketch style guide, a CSS and HTML style guide, and a React component library. I'm going to tell you the story of its creation, with a focus on why it was adopted so successfully in the company. With a bit of blood, sweat, and tears, well, actually, none of those things were required, fortunately. It was just research and hard work. We managed to build something that the teams were really proud of. They actually use and enjoy working on. So I'm hoping to inspire others who are on similar journeys. Okay, so first of all, some context. Let's go back to around May 2017. We had 9 front-end developers here in the dark blue, split across 3 development teams. So 1 was multidisciplinary and 2 were front-end only. We also had a separate team of 4 designers. And the company had around 100 people in total and had been around for about 8 years. So parts of the code base had also been around for about 8 years. I tell you all this so you can have some context for what kind of company our approach really worked. And if your company looks different to this, well, hopefully you'll get some ideas from my talk, but what worked for me might not work for you. So do just keep that in mind. So we had a number of different products. Each was essentially a customizable form on a different platform: mobile, web, email, etc. Each of these had their own smaller applications for the form and had a section of the main monolith application that allowed customers to manage their forms and analyze the data that they were receiving. So each of these products had been added gradually over the years, and in some cases used different JavaScript frameworks, and for the most part shared very little code. But the user experience was, well, at least should have been, very similar. So there was a lot of inconsistency and duplication in the application, in the apps. So I imagine many of you seen a picture like this before, and in fact could probably create something like this yourselves. We had a mix of inline styles. We had random CSS that was duplicated across the applications, and components from a style guide library written Angular 1. We also really wanted to gradually migrate the applications to React from Angular 1 and CoffeeScript. Designers were producing inconsistent designs because they didn't have their own guidelines themselves. Developers were hard coding and rewriting styles and components rather than sharing them, and there wasn't really much collaboration at all between developers and design. Usually projects would be designed months in advance before a developer was even involved, and then handed over as high-fidelity sketch files. And when styles needed to be updated, they needed to be changed in several different places. This obviously is far from ideal. So there were 2 main things that really started us on the road to building Stylabilla. So the first was that our team was growing really quickly, and it soon became clear that our way of working was just not sustainable. We could see that having a design system as our single source of truth would put us a really long way towards becoming more consistent in our application. It would save developers and designers a lot of time, and we would have higher quality design and code. So one of our designers led the first big effort to change this. He started auditing our existing application and began to build out a style guide in Sketch. He involved the other designers and front-end developers from the very beginning, and this was crucial. So at the same time, we had another team that was working on implementing a redesign of one of our end-user facing products. So these forms you see here on the left is the old design, and on the right is the redesign. So our designer worked alongside those front-end developers as we implemented the designs. And we also collaborated with the designer working on the style guide to ensure consistency. This gave us, honestly, a great opportunity to implement the Sketch style guide as a CSS style guide with shared styles that could be used to have that consistency across all future development and gradually be integrated into the legacy code base. Keep in mind, again, this is just how we did it. There are many different ways. There's no one perfect solution for this, unfortunately. But the first step I would always advise taking is think about what are your main goals for the project. So for us, we wanted to increase development speed, increase brand consistency, have the ability to modernize our designs more easily. So, changing a variable in one place to update a color that, seems so simple, but can be so tricky. Increasing performance, accessibility, and browser support, and also having flexibility for the future. And these goals really helped us make the decisions for us about how we architected our design system. So this is an actual photo of a sketch that I drew now 2 or 3 years ago when I was describing this architecture to the team. At the top is the design style guide. So this was just a sketch file. And then we have the CSS and the HTML documentation. And then we have our component library layer. So at the time, it was we were just working with React, but the idea here is that it doesn't matter what library we want to use in the future. Cool JavaScript framework of the future component library, maybe. And then we would have the applications themselves, which would just have the JavaScript in them. And they would have no CSS, just import the CSS through with the component library. So sometimes, of course, there is an exception. So I found this recently and it was incredibly useful. I think this is a really good way for people to go through the choice of whether to include things in the application specifically or in the style guide or component library that you've got. So the first choice is, does your design adhere to our style guide? Yeah, okay, cool, well then we're good, right? No, okay, can you change your design to use the style guide? And often this is a tricky question, right, to ask designers, but I think it's incredibly important for both developers and designers to always think critically about the designs that they're building and whether or not it actually needs to be unique enough. So do others agree with you, or are you kind of being a bit of a narcissist? I mean, this happens, right? Okay, is this a one-off design element, or are there other use cases? Well, if we found more use cases or think that there might be more use cases in the future, well then that's great. We can add it to the style guide or component library. And then lastly, okay, it's a very specialized case. You're absolutely sure you have to do it this way and you feel badly about it, then okay. And that's really it. This way, you'll actually build up a style guide or a component library that has everything that your application needs to run. So yes, this is the main concern with our architecture. So the problem that we were worried about was this duplication of markup. You may have noticed in the previous slide. It's in both the documentation and in the React component library as JSX. So the concept of dry, don't repeat yourself, was discussed back and forth for quite a while. And CSS obviously doesn't work without markup, but these days JavaScript writes our markup for us in the kinds of applications that I'm talking about. And this is why many companies include their JavaScript components in their CSS style guide. But this locks our CSS, our HTML, and our JavaScript together. And we really wanted that separation. So instead, we decided to use the HTML in the style guide as documentation only. It's plain HTML with accessibility and browser compatibility built in. And the JavaScript developer can then use that as a guide to build their component in whatever framework or language they want. So you can have a completely different team building a completely different application, maybe even an internal application, and they don't need to be locked into the JavaScript components that you've created. So having code that has to be updated in 2 places is far from ideal, but it was a trade-off that we decided to accept at the time and ended up really being worth it. We had a clear workflow and an upgrade path when the markup needs to change for the consumers of the style guide. And it was actually pretty hassle-free to do so. It also means that the barrier to entry for using the style guide is a lot lower. You can easily use it on hack day projects and internal projects and tools, for instance. It's a good teaching tool for other people in your company. It was really useful for us to separate it. So there are many different ways of building shared styles and components, but for our use case, the better separation we had, the more flexible we were. Oh wow, yeah, that's not what, okay. That's not what that looks like on my screen, but that's fine. It says you do you, because that's the message here, right? This worked really well for us, but yeah, it's up to you. For us, we also decided to stick with CSS rather than looking at something like CSS in JavaScript, because it was beginner friendly, much more widely understood, and it's one of the core building blocks of the web. So honestly, it's not going away anytime soon. We needed that separation and flexibility because we were talking about multiple applications built in multiple frameworks that will change over time. So these was the next step for us, right? To figure out how we were actually going to build this. And probably the biggest issue in a lot of different companies in regards to adopting a style guide is the workload, because it takes time. It's an investment, and it takes, and some of that work, as I was saying before, it doesn't deliver immediate customer value, or at least that's the perception. So these are some of the most popular contribution models. So we have solitary, which is where there's one person, single focus, that's all they're working on. Centralized, where it's a single team's focus. And federated, which means multiple people from multiple teams, and they have multiple focuses. They're like feature work maybe, and then the style guide on top of that. What we ended up doing was a combination of the above. So it depends mainly on the size of the company, which contribution model to choose, I would say. If you're very small, maybe one person is enough. And you might need the extra speed that one person focused on something for an amount of time can bring. If you're huge, well, then you might be lucky enough to have the resources to dedicate an entire team. But keep in mind that they'll probably be less connected to the actual use cases of your design system. If you're somewhere in between, like we were, then the federated model or a combination of this and something else is the best way to go, I think. So whatever you choose, remember that you are dealing with a product here and with end users, even if those users might be yourself and your team. This means you need to be committed to understanding those use cases and maintaining what you produce. So fortunately, we were lucky enough that our company decided that the investment was worth the time. And it was just up to us and our teams, including our product managers, to decide how we were going to allocate and prioritize the work. So we ended up with that federated team model with an additional construct of primary and secondary contributors. So we had different people from different teams, these front-end developers, with a few people who were more focused and less focused on this style guide. So there were 3 front-end developers and 1 designer across these multiple teams who were particularly interested in the challenge and really passionate about it. And they end up contributing most to the system. But in the end, actually every front-end developer and designer also contributed to a greater or lesser degree. And at that beginning, that one designer who was working on the project in terms of auditing the existing applications and creating the sketch files, well, as we started to work on the CSS style guide, we had weekly sessions with him, one of the other designers, and 3 front-end developers. And those developers spent a few days right at the beginning of the project working on the base of it, setting up some of the documentation, setting up the tooling, and designing the architecture. So we also created a separate project tracking board to keep track of everything that needed to be done for the project. And we then took a week a day a week out of our sprint to focus on the style guide, to create all the base styles. And yeah, it was everything except for the components, things like the typography, classes, colors, etc. So once most of this work was done, each team then took a few of those tasks into their sprints. And as each team worked on their own projects, the components that were needed for those projects were built in the style guide. So what do we end up creating, right? Well, here is basically what it looks like, and these resources are still being iterated on today. So first we had a sketch file where the designers were sharing all the designs in here. And then we have the website for the living CSS style guide. So living means that the styles it documents are the same ones, exactly the same, that are exported and used in our applications. We called it Stylabilla for simplicity's sake because it's at the core of the system. And the documentation is as clear as possible. Sorry. And the homepage here is the README for the project. Go. So here's an example of a component page for buttons. So we had a short description of the purpose of the component and the browser support, and then all the different stylings for the component. And then right down the bottom we have the HTML markup for the component. Here's another page that outlines the colors. And here's the React component library, simply called React Stylabilla. There's no custom styling for the guide itself because this was only used by product engineers, whereas the other one was shared throughout the company. You can see that, again, the browser support is documented, along with the properties that can be passed into the component, the UI itself, and the code that the user can then copy and paste into their application. Here's a simple loader component, and a more complex component called the mood rating, which again has a whole bunch of properties that you can pass into it. So finally, this is an example of one of the pages in the admin application, or at least it was when I left a little while ago. The areas outlined in red are using both Stylabilla and React Stylabilla, imported into an Angular application using ng React. The header component was upgraded as part of the gradual refactor, component by component, whereas the key insights panel was a new feature and therefore only ever written in Stylabilla and React Stylabilla. And this is how we kind of managed to gradually refactor and update our existing application. Okay, so what worked? I love this quote because for me, a design system really doesn't exist until it's in production. Pretty much anything we do, right? If it's not actually ever shipped to the customer, at least again from my perspective of working in a product company, then it doesn't really exist. Is it actually going to give us value? So we were really practical and iterative with the way that we built and shipped the design system. Rather than building the whole thing in Sketch, and then the whole thing in CSS, and then the whole thing in components, and then into the applications, we updated it component by component. The value again, should be getting the idea should be getting the value to the user as soon as possible. So shipping is obviously not just great for the user, but it's motivating for your team, right? And seeing the results of your efforts in the wild will also help you understand better what you need and how to get there. In particular, it's really useful to use it in a real project as soon as possible and continue to maintain it based on those insights. If you invest once upfront in a design system, but don't keep it up, well, you'll face the same situation as if you never invested it at all. You'll see immediate impact, but as things become more and more outdated, it will be used less and less. So as I was saying before, that project architecture, that choice that we made at the beginning, it worked really well for us. It meant that the CSS could be picked up by almost anybody, and they didn't need to know JavaScript or React. It meant we had a wider adoption of the system and a wider appreciation for the purpose of the system and why it was worth us spending the time on it. There was also much better collaboration with designers and devs right from the very beginning. Even things like component naming was collaborative. Obviously, naming things is very hard. And this meant that we were all using the same language. We didn't have 5 different names for the same thing, so we all knew what we were referring to when we talked about an alert, for example. It wasn't a notification or a toast or a banner. It also meant that the concepts that sometimes fall to the side with these kinds of projects, they were all considered. So things like responsiveness, multiple states like active, disabled, hover, etc. And it really strengthened the way that we thought about the UI as a collection of composable components. It was taking that component thinking from our developers' heads into our designers. So the element of our team model that was most crucial for us was having the 3 or so front-end developers who were really champions for the project. People who had experience with design systems, who really understood what we wanted to achieve and how important it was to maintain really high standards for what we were building. These people were also typically those that were really good at following that decision tree that I showed earlier and would push back on design and product if it needed to be. If they were asking for things that were inconsistent with the style guide. In the end, a lot of the success of Stylabilla, I think, was due to these evangelists. So overall, the way that we ended up collaborating on the style guide worked really well. Everyone was on board, and there were multiple teams using the style guide in their projects and contributing back to it. So I'll just let you read through this one quickly. Yeah, who's seen this happen? I'm not sure how familiar this situation is, but I've definitely experienced this before. We were lucky that the company could see the value in the investment that we were making, and it was incredibly important. If anyone out there is trying to design a design system without this, by doing it in your spare time maybe, or your downtime, or I'll have a minute next week to do some of this, well, you are in for a massive struggle. Even if you're able to create something, it's very unlikely that you'll be able to create something of quality that people know about and actually want to use. If your company doesn't support you in creating a design system, then do your research and make sure that they really understand the longer term benefits. However, do consider also that they're often not enough to convince a product team who has other plans to deliver more immediate customer value, which is understandable. So the best way that I found to convince people is to find a project that's already underway. And if it can benefit from the design system that you're building, well then you're in luck, because one of the main reasons that we were able to get buy-in is because we were doing that redesign that I showed you earlier. So the value of the project was able to be seen almost straight away, not only by us and by the business, but also by our customers. And if you've taken them through all that, then consider maybe it's just not the right time for it. Not every team is in the right place or even needs a design system. Don't stress yourself over fighting for something that not everyone wants and therefore won't use, even if you do have the time to build it. The goal for us that was most important was to understand that realistically, we were only ever going to be able to increase brand consistency. There was absolutely no way that we were going to be able to solely work on updating our entire UI. This would have been absolutely lovely, but it's also completely unrealistic, at least it was for us. We had so much UI that it would have taken a massive amount of time, while providing, in the end, honestly not a huge amount of value. We were a B2B company, and our customers they wanted to be able to use the software. I think if you work at a company like Google even, so many of their products have been extremely inconsistent in design over the years, if you think about it. Like the old Google Calendar was pretty outdated for quite a while there. But obviously they're still extremely successful. So although a design system is like this magic thing that we think that will solve everything, you've got to be realistic about how you're implementing it and how you're rolling it out. So instead, our goal was eventual consistency, where anything new was built with a style guide. And any time that we touch something older, we try to update it. So as I've mentioned, buy-in from the business, extremely important. And so one of the things that really helped us with this was the promotion. So when we first started the project, we gave it a name, and we kind of created our little logo here, and we announced it to the whole company with a small demo to show them how useful it would be. We also referred to it when presenting on any other projects. And we helped our colleagues use it in their hackathon projects. So we had infrastructure developers, engineers using it. We had back-end developers using it, pretty much everybody for all their hackathon projects. So another reason it was so successful was that from the beginning, we had a focus on quality, and we were really careful that we had a strong base from which to work from. We thought a lot about the potential uses of our components, where to split them up, and how generic to make them. Believe it or not, there is such a thing as high-quality, highly maintainable CSS. Especially working on a design system that was going to be used in multiple projects, we wanted this from the very beginning. So we used BEM to add predictability to our class names and make it easier to understand how and where a class should be used. And we used ITCSS, or inverted triangle CSS, for the architecture, which controlled our specificity, making it easier to maintain and scale. And we also trained all of our contributors up on CSS code smells, so things like nested selectors and magic numbers. We also had really good documentation and linting to check that the right documentation was included with the components when they were built. Not only on styles themselves, around how they should be used, and browser support, accessibility, and what JavaScript was required to make them interactive, but also on our README, contributing guidelines and definition of done. So the last one was extremely important. We essentially wouldn't allow a component to be added into our library until it met a list of requirements. And we automated the checking of this as much as possible. So here we have a few things like styles follow the conventions below, accessibility has been considered, so the components have to be navigable by keyboard, all the ARIA attributes and everything that's needed are in there. We also had automated accessibility tests. Performance has been considered, so animations follow the best practices, browser support requirements are adhered to, the compiled CSS has been checked, and there's no unnecessary repetition, etc. And the documentation is included as well. So one way that we did this was with linting to do these checks. We had really good style lint rules, which is an amazing tool. It's also extendable, so you can create your own plugins. And it meant that the SAS was clean, easy to read, and easy to iterate on. I actually spent the time to go through every possible rule so that we could enforce the agreements that our team had made on how we wanted to write the CSS. And I even did create a plugin myself. There's some amazingly useful rules in there that are easy to miss. So we also had, as I said, those automated accessibility tests. So Pally is really great. It's a linter for accessibility, and it will check all alt text, focus states, etc. However, do remember, like, accessibility is not a checklist. You always got to actually think about the human behind it, not just making sure that all your tests pass. It's very useful, though, to get you a lot of the way there. So often design systems, I found, have a perception problem where they've got this broken window theory. The idea here is that visible signs of crime in criminal thinking, in criminology, I should say, like a single broken window or a broken UI component, for example, create this environment that encourages more crime and more broken UI components. So that's why we were really careful from the very beginning that we were kind of gatekeeping the quality of the style guide. So yeah, in my experience, not being able to trust the quality of your style guide is one of the biggest reasons it doesn't get used. And that's why it's so important to spend your time on it. Once you find a bug in the style guide that you're using, it's so much more tempting, like my friend from the beginning was saying, to just override it by using your own styles, rather than fixing the bug in the style guide itself. So we also focused on making it really easy for people to use, not just by making sure that the documentation was really descriptive and easy to read, but also by providing different ways to consume it. You can include it as a CDN link, so that gives you the whole library minified. You can also install it as an NPM module and compile it alongside the rest of your application. You can choose to include the whole thing or only the components you need, meaning smaller file sizes and better performance for your application. I'd also really recommend prefixing all your style guide classes. So we chose SB for Stylabilla. And what that means is that when apps get bigger and more complicated and maybe do occasionally need their own CSS that isn't in the style guide, or they maybe need to include third-party CSS for some reason, then they can see at a glance which is the style guide CSS. Following on from that, another way that we made it really user-friendly was by using semantic versioning. So the idea here is that the first number is increased when there's a breaking change, the second when there's a non-breaking feature added, and the third when there's a non-breaking bug fix added. This means that users can indicate if they want to stick to a very specific version of the styles, or they want all the updates that aren't breaking changes, or they want just the very latest version all the time. Breaking changes can be a major pain point for your users. If you suddenly change the name of a class that they're using, for instance, and they're only able to use the latest version of what you've created, then it can very easily break the look of their application. The general rule is if it requires users to make changes to their code, then it's a breaking change. So we used a tool called Semantic Release to automate this process of creating the right version based on the commit message and releasing to GitHub and NPM with release notes. It's really useful. Again, it comes down to a question of trust. If users can trust your style guide, that it's not going to suddenly change on them without them realizing, then they are much more likely to use it. Okay, so what didn't work so well? Yeah, so one thing that this approach really we didn't take into account was cross-platform design consistency. So although the sketch style guide, of course, is used by our mobile team, they can't use CSS. So if we were to have started this project now, perhaps we would have looked into a concept that people call design tokens or design primitives. The idea here is that base variables and concepts from the design system, such as colors, spacing, font size, etc., are written in a language such as JSON or YAML, meaning that they can be imported into a CSS style guide or an iOS or Android application. And another thing that we might have changed now that we look back is that there were a few kind of complicated components that we custom built ourselves, but we could have had an open source version and used that. This might have involved making some compromises with our designers, but it could have saved us a lot of time. Documentation tooling is another thing that I would have loved to have been able to spend some more time on. So when we were looking for something to help us create that CSS-only style guide, at the time we were overwhelmed with options, but we didn't really find one that exactly fitted our needs. We ended up going with KSS Node, but we had to customize it quite a bit to do exactly what we wanted. There wasn't really, at the time, a consistent and convenient tool set for these kinds of projects. Perhaps Storybook is kind of like that these days. They do now also have a version that supports HTML, which is very cool. So yeah, probably the most difficult part about this project, and I think if any of you have tried to do a design system before, it comes down to time, right? So when we started off the CSS style guide project, we tried at first to have a front-end developer from each team spending 1 day a week on the style guide. So doing those base styles, variables, and structure, etc. However, it quickly became apparent this really wasn't working, and I relearned that age-old lesson that if it's not in the sprint, it won't get done. Whatever type of process your team uses, working on the style guide has to be explicitly part of that process, rather than one of those things that you can sneak in on the side, or to be done when you've got time. I also do wish that we'd been able to spend more time on the documentation. Anything that wasn't exported as part of the style guide itself really wasn't held up to the same level of quality, and therefore it did become harder to maintain over time. So especially at the beginning, we added a few components in that didn't really quite meet our definition of done, and therefore, it was tricky because we had maybe someone who was less familiar with the project, and they didn't, say, test it on a screen reader or an old browser, and then maybe the reviewer didn't have time to do it themselves. So yeah, I'm pretty proud of what we created with this project, but there are a number of other things that I would have loved to have done. So I really wanted to add automated visual regression testing. So you can see here there's the existing version of the code, the new version of the code, and then a diff, so you can tell what actually changed with the latest commit. So it's perhaps not necessary at the beginning, but as the style gets used more and more places, changes become much higher risk, right? Because you're impacting a lot more possible parts of your code base or your different applications. So we could have had these automated visual regression tests that would run when a pull request is made and be added to it. So when you're looking at GitHub, you see the pull request, you see the code, and then you would see a screenshot like this, and it would show you exactly the changes that were happening because of the code that was committed. So testing over multiple browsers and, say, for multiple widths and maybe even right to left alignment would have been really extremely useful, having a tool such as this. In general, I think there's a lot more we could have done with automation. So anything, again, that makes the design system easier to use makes it more likely to be successful. So for instance, we could have created an autocomplete plugin for VS Code, which was our idea of choice. And that would autocomplete class names that would prevent the developer from having to look them up. Like, that would have been really cool. We also could have added bots to our GitHub project to pick up on common mistakes and pull requests. Performance testing could also be automated with a checker on pull requests to say, oh, you've added so much code here that the whole app has become completely bloated. And the automation that we did include is great because it removes that reliance on humans to remember everything that needs to be done. And let's face it, there's a lot to remember. And again, it makes the style guide more trustworthy and therefore more likely to be used. So one of the biggest issues I found with style guides is that it's also one of the most difficult to solve. And that's the fact that we continue to work in entirely different mediums. When you have designers contributing to a sketch style guide and developers to an HTML and CSS style guide, you're guaranteed to end up with small inconsistencies, even if you're being really collaborative and even if, say, the designers can understand code. But fortunately, there are way more options these days. So Envision's Design System Manager is a tool that looks to be really useful in this space. It uses the concept of design tokens that I was referring to before to enable integration cross-platform. And design tool Figma also has an API that is being used in really interesting ways. GitHub, for example, is using it to map those design tokens like colors and typography to components in code and to automate tasks like checking components. React Sketch App has also inspired a lot of different tooling. So Seek have done some really nice open source things in this space. Framer is another option for bridging this gap. And while we don't exactly want to go back to the days of Dreamweaver, but anything that allows designers and developers to collaborate on those composable components massively moves us forward together. So the system isn't perfect, and it's by no means a complete recipe for success. It's simply what has worked for us given our situation. Every new feature or application that's now built uses this system, and the consistency of the product has improved massively. There's now a common language between design, dev, and product, and the look and feel of the whole product has begun to evolve together. So hopefully it's given you some ideas for your own design system journey, and I wish you luck. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Wonderful stuff. Very, very informative. We've got loads and loads of questions, and I imagine we're not going to be able to get through all of them. But I imagine you have a Twitter handle. People can get in touch.
I do indeed, yeah. It was on my slides, Rebecca. Yeah.
There we go. So we'll rattle through a few. So the top one here is, how do you deal with updates in your design systems? Do you update your sketch file first? Is it feasible to keep updating the sketch, the CSS, JSS all the time?
It ended up being feasible to do that, yeah. So usually the designers would start off and they would use the sketch style guide and they would use that to collaborate on the changes that they wanted to make. And then a front-end developer would take the changes that had been made in the application designs and implement them in the CSS and in the JavaScript. It didn't actually add that much extra work, and it gave us a hell of a lot of benefits, so yeah.
I guess you've just got to be on top, you've got to make sure that you make those changes immediately.
Pretty much,
otherwise
yeah.
you get lost.
Yeah.
Okay, next one. How do you deal with implementing the new design system CSS next to the old CSS base, existing classes to new classes without having a big bang implementation?
Yeah, well, so I guess the biggest benefit, as I said there, is by prefixing all of our new style guide classes with SB. It meant that we were never going to end up with a collision, right? Because all of our class names were going to have to be different. So that was the biggest thing there. And then in terms of integrating them all together, it was kind of like the slide that I showed of the main page of the application, where we did have different components from different versions all living together. So yeah, it did work out.
Question here from Pavel. In the React Components API, you have a class name property which opens a backdoor to anyone using it to break consistently. Why did you open it?
Maybe I don't fully understand the question. If this person wants to come and see me afterwards, let's chat after.
Okay, we'll move on to the next one. Can you share some experiences regarding breaking backward compatibility and its implications?
Ooh, good question. Have we ever really fucked it up that badly? Yeah, I can't say anything massively impactful, not anything that I don't think that anything that a user would have noticed, fortunately. So yeah, I think for us it was just, again, it was upskilling all the developers on like what a breaking change actually is, you know, and it did take time for us to all get used to that concept. But once we did, it was like, okay, cool. Well, I know that if I'm gonna change this class to be have a background color of red rather than blue, it's like, well, okay, you know, that's not going to require the application developer to change anything, because it's going to just change from red to blue. But if it's like, oh, I'm going to add, you know, 30 pixels of padding to it, well, then that's quite likely to break somebody's application. So yeah, it was kind of that thinking.
Okay, next one. You developed base HTML components and React implementation separately. How do you communicate changes and make sure all the implementations get updated?
It would be the same developer doing those changes, yeah.
How long did it take for Stylabilla to be designed, developed, and deployed and integrated entirely?
Good question. Well, it's not integrated entirely, and it was within maybe the first 2 or 3 weeks of building it that we first used it in production. So like it's a weird question, because it's been used the whole time that we've been working on it, and it's still changing. Even though I'm not there anymore, I can see in GitHub it's updating quite a lot. So
it's a constantly evolving.
Exactly.
Baby.
Yeah.
Do you have experience with existing design systems like Pattern Lab?
Yeah, a little bit. I mean, obviously, like Bootstrap was kind of the where a lot of people learned this stuff, and I think we took a lot of learnings from a lot of different pattern libraries around how to structure our CSS and what to call things and the documentation. And I'm so happy that so many people are open sourcing this stuff, right? Because there's a lot of really great stuff out there that you can copy. So, yeah.
There's another question here actually, which is similar. Why is Stylabilla better than Bootstrap?
Well, because it was custom built for us. It's based on our designs for our product. Yeah.
Right, this one from Paul Van Buren. How do you keep all participants informed about changes? Have you got any tips on do's and don'ts?
Yeah, so as I was saying, we used Semantic Release, which automates our release notes. And so if, say, one of our application developers, if they've fixed their version that they're using of Stylabilla, well then when it's just like a normal NPM package that they might pull down, and it's like, well, okay, it's been updated, so I need to update it. And then when you update it, you would go and look at the release notes. It's exactly the same as using, you know, versions of any other package. Yeah.
This is quite a good one. Is there a way to work out the value of a design system pre or post creation? I imagine that's getting metrics for how valuable it's been.
Yeah, that is a good question. I guess, what's actually measurable around that? I guess the amount of like consistency in your applications. But as I was saying, you know, maybe consistency is like this beautiful end goal, but you're never gonna have your entire application be consistent. So maybe it would be more around like time saved for developers. Like that would be quite a cool thing to measure actually, and see like, okay, well, how much time did this developer save by just using this React component that already existed, compared to having to build something themselves, maybe, yeah.
Can you share your lint configuration?
My lint configuration. Yeah, definitely. Stylabilla is open source. So if you go to, I think it's github.com/usabilla/stylabilla, you'll find it. I'll tweet the slides and resources and stuff after the talk.
Okay. And there's so many. Let's just go with why is JS part is not shared? It isn't part of design by itself. I don't think there's enough.
Maybe some more context if that person wants to tweet me or see me afterwards. Absolutely. I'll be around.
How long will it typically take for a design system to take off? So it's quite similar to the question we had before.
Again, like if you're starting, like I don't know, so many. When it comes to building product applications, it's all about scope, right? And so it's trying to figure out what is the absolute smallest amount of code that you can ship that's actually valuable, and starting there. So not trying to think, oh, I have to build this beautiful, amazing thing before I can put it in production. So it would be within 2 weeks, hopefully, you could ship your very first class.
Someone was asking highlighting the visual changes and what the what you were using there. So Lint, I imagine.
Well, we didn't actually use it. That was one of my I wish we could have. So we didn't actually find a tool that was going to be easy enough. But there's a lot of stuff out there. If you search for automated visual regression testing, which is a very long series of words, but yeah, you'll find a lot of different very cool tools out there to do that.
Isn't a breaking change also anything which can affect the layout, like height and padding, etc.?
Yep, definitely.
Yeah.
I think I mentioned padding would definitely be a breaking change for sure. I may have missaid something before. If I did, I apologise.
Okay, and it's 10 past, so I think that is lunchtime.
Cool.
Can we have a big round of applause for Rebecca Hall? Thank you very much.